You know what we're gonna say? We're gonna say welcome to the Week in Sports Cars with a poorly sung introduction by yourself, Marshall Pruett. Wait a minute, you're not yourself. By me, Marshall Pruett, and my guest, my co-host, I don't even know what to call you, our family, Graham Goodwin here on this little podcast presented by Cooper Tires. Weird weekend last weekend in that you were at one of IMSA's big races. I was not. I didn't follow anything. I took my first vacation with my wife in about 5 years, Graham Goodwin, and in doing so, man, it looks like I missed a whale of a race at Watkins, Glen.
Boy, did you. Well, number one, however good the race, I think you got the better deal, but it was a very good race. My first time at Watkins Glen, what a place. Weird and wonderful weekend. Fantastic track, featured, amongst other things, really good racing for the overall win, and one of the DSC crew featuring in a police chase, which was all good fun and games. But yeah, it was a great weekend at Watkins Glen, searingly hot, as it is. I'm talking to you now, MP, from JFK in New York, after taking another 24 hours here to take in a quick meeting yesterday. Searing hot outside. You'll hear a lot of chatter and a couple of clinks of glasses and plates, I'm sure, in the British Airways Lounge, is where I'm talking to you from right now, having once again missed the opportunity to watch the usual dunderheads that are the England football team in a deciding game in the World Cup. Unfortunately, had to leave for the airport while the by now infamous penalty shootouts that this time we didn't lose. It turns out that the Colombian team are more dunderhead than our dunderheads. Wow.
Well, having caught the last seconds of the Germany-Russia match where PKs were the deciding factor, at least it's good that your team happened to have success there. And I'm not saying the German or Russian teams were mine, but having seen how that played out to a grand astonishment, good to hear that at least you guys aren't out of it yet.
Well, I mean, I should say, by the way, to all of our German listeners listening,
look, if we can't be petty and cruel, why have a podcast? That's what my grandfather always told me in the 1970s. All right, well, Mr. Goodwin, all mirth and laughter aside, I just finished recording the Week in IndyCar podcast with our friend Brian Herta, and opened it with one item, and I feel like we should do the same here, because Mario Andretti is just as important to us in the fendered world with his achievements in sports car racing, and the unfortunate passing of his wife Deanne, mother, not only wife to Mario, but mother to Michael Andretti and Jeff Andretti, and grandmother to Marco, and just, absolute bedrock of the Andretti family. So learning of her passing, very unfortunate, something that Mario had been dealing with privately for most of June, and I must admit I was mad at myself, Graham, for asking a very, it was unintentionally dumb and insensitive, but Mario and I were speaking at Road America, and I asked him if he'd had a chance to watch much of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and I had just completely escaped my mind that he was indeed in intensive care with Mrs. Andretti at the time. So, he had mentioned that he saw a little bit of it, but he was busy with other things. So, and again, we're talking about a lady who supported the careers of, you could effectively say, all the Andrettis, whether it was her husband, her sons, grandson, nephews, and whatnot. And anytime you lose someone like Mrs. Andretti, it's hard not to take a moment just to express appreciation for her and all that she means, and so many women in the sport, either as those supporting their husbands, those working in technical capacities, driving and such. She is just as important as anyone else in this sport of sports car racing that we love.
I completely agree, MP. I'm glad you said what you just said there, which is the ladies around the sport, whether directly involved or whether supporting those directly involved, it's a tough gig in a million and one ways. And, the matriarch that was Deanne Andretti, was that 57 years of marriage? That is astonishing, isn't it? And what a legacy. Rest in peace, lady, and just be content while you wait for your fella in due time to join you, that you've left a wonderful legacy for the history of the sport that we love.
So with all that said, we had a pretty amazing weekend in Watkins Glen. Tell me about what you saw and witnessed there across these 3 classes, across 6 hours of racing, because at least from what I have gleaned, the finale, the end of those 6 hours, and who ended up in the winning positions, maybe barring the Fords in GT Le Mans, but it certainly seemed like this race was not exactly linear and definitely had some different outcomes than maybe might have been predicted from when the green flag waved.
Well, let's take them sort of in reverse order, because there were dramas in each of the classes of a very different sort. As I sit here now, I'm still trying to work out how it was that Certain Motorsport actually won in GTD. They were there and thereabouts. Some mighty stints from Marcus Paltella aboard the 96 BMW, but it is fair to say that only really featured at the sharp end of the race in the closing stages. Before that, it was all about the number 29 Audi, which again fell foul of the powers that be, the IMSA powers that be. We got a stop and 60-second hold for allegedly working on the car while the pits were closed. Team said that wasn't the case. IMSA said it was. They argued the odds a little too long for IMSA's liking, were then told that they had a further stop and go. And, well, as to whether or not it was the team's choice to take the car behind the wall or IMSA basically saying, that's it, you're out of here, the reality was the leading car was eliminated from the race in the closing minutes. We had the Acuras up there. We had the Lexus pair up there. Jack Hawksworth, I believe, couldn't find Jack after the race, may well have actually thrown away a winning opportunity by taking a trip down pit lane he didn't need to do. About at the time that the 5-1 car was actually called in for a drive-through, the 1-5 car came down pit road. The team didn't really, or certainly weren't going to admit to us why it was that that actually happened, but there was no penalty laid, and that put him out to the podium position finishing order, despite a spirited run back. Lexus, that were right at the sharp end all weekend, came away with nothing to show for it in terms of podium finishes, MP.
So one of the great things this month, Graham, is long time friends, actually dating back to my first year in motor racing in 1986. The Justice brothers, Ed Justice and his family, have said, hey, they've been podcasters for a long time and wanted to help support us for the month here, my friends. So with all that said, thank you, Justice Brothers. And as I'll tell you now, and as I'll tell you a little bit later in the episode, Justice Brothers additive lubricants and cleaners have been America's brand for quality for decades. The products are used and also proven by the world's top racing teams. Wayne Taylor Racing being one of them, Mr. Goodwin. They happen to sport Justice Brothers logos, and the cool thing that they've asked to do here is they're looking to grow their network of suppliers and distributors. So rather than just promoting a product, they're actually hoping that by partnering with us for the month, that they'll have more folks check in to look at the products that they make for the automotive world, semi-trucks, agricultural, and industrial markets, for those who might want to become salesmen and saleswomen in distributing Justice Brothers additive lubricants and cleaners. And you can check out those opportunities for distribution through their website at justicebrothers.com. So let's look at maybe the most, I don't know if controversial is the way to put it, but the most disputed, I think, or maybe the least clear. How's that? We'll just go with least clear outcome. And that was even Will Turner, who I spoke with this morning, to which I said, how the heck did you guys win GT Daytona? And, he gave some great answers, but even he said, I'm not exactly sure what happened with the number 29 Land Motorsport Audi. There seems to be a little bit of confusion, again, as to whether drivers late in the race entered the pits when pits were closed or a split second beforehand. I know that you spoke with Peter Barron, who's been involved with that team, and I seem to recall an event maybe in Florida somewhere where Land might have had a little bit of controversy earlier in the year. Nothing fuel-related, but there was a penalty for working on the car during closed pits under yellow, and then there was a second penalty for failing to observe the first, and things really spiraled out of control. So, boy, whereas things went bad for Land early-ish at Daytona, seems like things went bad for them late with a win in their grasp at Watkins.
It most certainly was the case, and you've got to ask the question after those two catastrophes for the team, are we going to see them at Petit Le Mans? I don't think that's a given at this stage. There were certainly some very, very unhappy faces at Monteplace by Land Motorsport post-race, and Peter Barron making it clear, look, the driver told us when he came into the pits were open. It might have been pretty tight, but when I came to the pits were open. It was something like 40 or 50 seconds when I think it was a tyre carcass, certainly, it was debris on the track before the full caution was called. So there was time to call the car in. These kind of calls are pretty marginal. There were a number of calls, I should say, that were, I think, fairly marginal. And the odd thing in this case is that the marginal side fell on the side of giving a penalty rather than not. There were a number of incidents on track where no further action was deemed appropriate or necessary, where I have to tell you, I think if it had been the WEC, it would have been the opposite view.
And from that standpoint, we opened the door to Turner Motorsport, their BMW M6, that really interesting driver lineup of Don Yount, who rarely flattered himself when he was getting introduced to IMSA in the PC category, but seems to have found a happier home in GT with Turner Motorsport this year. Dylan McIvern, who I appreciate greatly, Graham, because this is someone who is a youngish driver, has really committed himself to the sports car route, more on the GT side, having raced everything from Spec Miatas to IMSA's Conti Tire Series, a little bit of Trans Am as well. And then obviously you have good old Marcus Baltala, who we've known is a rock star all along, but normally what we're talking about, and I know this is discussed in articles, and Will Turner also mentioned, normally we're talking about a team with, whether they have two actual silver-rated drivers, most teams in GTD, especially at a endurance event like the Sahlen 6 Hours, they're going to have three drivers. Two of them, regardless of their rating, are going to be pros or pretty darn near pro, and then one true pro-am. You could look to Turner and say they probably have the most am in the class in Don Yount. They have, Dylan, who is rising, but I would not, put him up against any of the hardcore pros. Marcus, obviously a pro, but this is, one of the lighter driver lineups in terms of star power, and they ended up coming away with victory. I mean, that has to be beyond the big win by JDC-Miller and GAINSCO overall. I mean, this has to be one of the biggest stories that we're going to remember from this race for years to come.
Oh, without a doubt. And I spoke to Marcus afterwards. I was known Marcus since he was, very early 20s and racing in Belcar of all things. It's astonishing to actually check the Wikipedia page. And Marcus Paltella has just turned 40 last year. Still looks like he's in his 20s. But I would be interested to go back and see just exactly how much heavy lifting Marcus did. I think the answer is a lot. He certainly told me that he was actually changed out of his race suits and ready to kind of watch the remainder of the race from the pit box, when was told, actually, no, you are going to get back into the car. So I think they'd seen the opportunity to grab a podium finish. It looked like that was all it was going to be until the 29 got that penalty, and it all went horribly wrong for them from there on in. So cracking stuff. Will Turner, I'm sure, will be absolutely delighted with that. And they move on to CTMP Marshall with a very different look to their driver squad, I believe.
Pretty look, sexy look. What kind of look are we talking about here, Goodwin?
Well, if we're talking about the likelihood of, if you like, the most storied BMW driver in IMSA's recent history, who might you be thinking?
Oz Negri, Patrick Dempsey,
No.
Alex Gurney.
No. try Bill Oberlin. Bill Oberlin
Ooh,
will be at CTMP with Robbie Foley.
young fella.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that.
So all good stuff. So I mean, yeah, Will Turner is pulling all sorts of rabbits out of hats at the moment, and who MP would bet against them with that lineup being in the mix again?
I love it. I love it. And one of the things I appreciate about Will Turner is he's not afraid to just try different. You know, Will Turner and different and dice being rolled. It's part of the fun. So I'm a big Will Turner fan. Just on a personal note, fan of the guy because self-made has found a really great link with BMW after becoming one of their leading aftermarket entities. And yeah, just always a fan of a guy who loves racing, invests himself into it, and has lots of good things happen compared to just zillions of dollars falling from the sky and not having to do much to earn it. Well, let's talk about that. Let's go a little bit further on that front, Mr. Goodwin. So there are two things that I was told by DPi entrants prior to Watkins Glen, and they did register with me. I don't know why I did not talk about it more, amplify it more, but I do know that afterwards, after a WEC P2 one, I was like, well, you idiot, there are a couple of DPi entrants who told you that that's kind of what they expected to see happen. And that's exactly what happened with the JDC-Miller team, the number 99 Red Dragon featuring sponsorship from Bob Stallings' GAINSCO insurance outfit there. Before we get to the ins and outs of how they won, give me a general feel for the atmosphere behind that win as they rolled into victory lane, Graham, either from fans and such. I'm guessing that those on site were just as ecstatic as those who were maybe watching from afar.
Well, some of them, certainly the JDC-Miller squad, utterly delighted. Absolutely correct that they should be. I know you could have something to say, but what a move to take the lead. They had not really been in race leading contention until that restart, when all of a sudden Stephen Simpson, just confirmed as an American citizen in the last few days, pulled off that 3-wide move as the two leaders squabbled over the restarts. He looked up the inside, found a gap wide enough to put an Orica, and did exactly that. That was an astonishing move. I think that will be move of the year, no matter what else actually happens. As for the LMP2 side of things, a couple of things to say about that. They weren't ultimately the fastest, but were certainly competitive when the best drivers were aboard the cars. What they did have was a big advantage on fuel mileage. So on fuel mileage, they were going laps, about 3 laps longer per tank of fuel. I think the advantage over most was 2 litres over the DPIs. We had drivers that were good enough to actually squeeze the best out of those packages, in particular from the Core Autosport squad, who will come back to their adventures in a moment, and the United Autosports Ligier. Both of those crews will feel, I think, pretty gutted that they weren't the ones on the top step, particularly the United team, who finished 4th after a clash with the core car coming into the kind of the final couple of stints that really ultimately cost them any opportunity to push hard for a podium and possibly even the win. But we had a corking race. There will be, I am sure, some perfectly legitimate comments about the level of competitiveness from particularly the Cadillacs. They just did not seem to have the ponies to compete with the Acuras or indeed the better of the LMP2s throughout. Mazda had a pretty horrible weekend. Troubles throughout for the 77 after a big shunt in practice for Rennie Rast. I'm afraid to say, I think it was entirely Rennie's fault. Cut across the front of the 73 Park Place car, ended up inverted. Rennie mercifully okay, but they had a race to forget. The 55 never really got in amongst them. ESM had a horrible race. Horrible race.
They deserve a do-over almost. I mean, it seems like showing up. They were punished for even showing up on race day.
Well, I mean, lost an engine in qualifying for the 22 car. Both cars caught up in a clash that involved Tristan Vautier in the number 90 Spirited Daytona car. One of the cars will miss CTMP because they don't have sufficient stock of spare engines to fulfill both cars there, and realistically they were out of it on lap one. Is the reality there? But that said, what that left us with was when the Cadillacs were in their pomp, they were there and thereabouts, but realistically on a clean run could not compete with the Acuras, or indeed with the 2, 3, arguably 4 or 5 LMP2s with the better drivers aboard. But the reality was this was the most competitive we've seen across DPi and LMP2 for the whole season, MP. And we're not a million miles, I don't think, from a solution that might just keep the international relevance of some of the banner events for IMSA. It was great to have this one as a proper endurance race. The 6-hour format really suited it. It meant that the stories that were emerging over 1, 2, 3 stints in searing heat. How hot? Well, John Love from Michelin came over and told me the track temperature, I think midway through the race, was 140 degrees. It was absolutely baking hot. And these guys were, you could wring them out once they've been in those cars for a double stint. Cracking race, some stars emerging. Paul di Resta, great again. Bruno Senna, absolutely fantastic. Romain Dumas, a week after taking that record at Pikes Peak, was in his pomp. Colin Brown did great stuff again. Core Autosport giving up their pole position to put John Bennett in the car to start with, and it fell beautifully for them. And John Bennett, Core Autosport, having given up their pole position to allow John Bennett to start the race, well, strategic call from the Core Autosport team. John kept car on the lead lap in extreme circumstances, let's not forget. Then the full course yellow came at just the right time, just within his pit window, which meant he could effectively restart the clock again, complete his second stint, qualify the Truman Aiken Award points in the NAAC, which means that he potentially now in the mix for the auto entry for the Le Mans 24 Hours in 2019 with Autosport, but they got the second position courtesy of Juan Montoya coughing on fuel on the very last corner in the Acura. Controversy around the clash with United Autosports, but no quibble at all that the Core Autosports Orica, as well as the United Autosports Ligier, were the form LMP2s. It's saying something that neither of those won the race, but without a shadow of a doubt, they were the two that were duking it out for most of the race, stretching that fuel envelope, and stealthily up comes the number 99 to take it.
So a couple of great things in there with everything you mentioned. We'll unpack our very first usage of BOP, one of the 3 instances of BOP references we allow ourselves per episode. Interesting within the prototype category that IMSA chose to make no changes of any substance coming into Watkins Glen. Makes me wonder, Graham, looking at the next 2 rounds where prototypes will compete. Keep in mind that there's a Lime Rock visit coming up, and then after, not too long after, there's a VIR visit on the GT front. But if we look at the general speed and pace within the class of the DPIs and the WEC P2s, we're headed to Canadian Tire Motorsports Park this weekend, similar to Watkins Glen. I would say we could potentially see a little bit less of the P2 competitiveness, knowing that there are a couple of corners that are slower, that require hard acceleration from lower in the rev range, which is not something where the spec Gibson in the WEC P2 cars happens to have an advantage. But there are some places where high speeds and stretching of legs takes place, and that is where, like we saw Watkins Glen, the WEC P2s are in a happy place. But then they head to Road America after that, and that's another place where there are a couple corners where lowerish speeds are involved, but for the most part, it would not be insane to think, Graham, that having just witnessed what took place at Watkins, which were the WEC P2s being very competitive, maybe not necessarily faster on a single lap than the best Acura DPIs, but really in the competitive mix in the top 5, wouldn't be strange to see that as a possibility to carry on, barring any major BOP changes to speed up some of the DPIs, both at CTMP this weekend and the beginning of August at Road America. But that also leads to another question of the Mazdas look like they weren't really on a very competitive form, and barring Rene Rast seeing if it could go any faster on its roof, I don't know if we would point to that as being any major cause of a lack of pace or slowing the team down. I just think the BOP that they got hit with a little while ago is keeping them pulled back a bit. Nissan, it's been a little while since I recalled seeing them as truly competitive in a big flowing track. We saw Sebring obviously as a place where they did quite well, and there was also a great performance that we saw for most of the race at Detroit. But again, just coming back to did they look like they had something truly for anyone else at Watkins? I don't think so. Cadillac, to your point, they've been pulled back a fair amount. Granted, Jordan Taylor had a shot at a win until he and Montoya slowed each other down and Steven Simpson got by. So, but we could also say fairly that Cadillac hasn't looked like its same roaring self, at least in evidence last weekend. Acura, I would say they might be expecting some sort of hammer. I mean, they've been looking really strong, even though they only have one win so far. They have been looking stronger than the rest for a little while. But if IMSA were to leave the three DPIs relatively alone, pull back the Acura just a little bit, which I think might happen regardless, it might not be too crazy to think that a Core or a JDC, or any of the other full-time entrants that'll be at the next two long flowing rounds, could challenge for another win. Is that something you might foretell in the future as well?
Well, I think let's put it this way. It would be incorrect to go into it believing that they were just stone cold faster through the whole event, particularly than the Acuras, because they weren't. They were leading on rotation because they were going longer on fuel. And, of course, there's two or three factors that come into play with CTMP and with Road America. Number one is the race isn't as long. Number two is we aren't going to have the United Ligier, and that was very much the one that was cycling round to be extremely competitive. And the other one is, of course, that in very many instances it's going to be back to a two-man driver squad with a solidly kind of pro-am effort from some of the LMP2 cars, and that might well have other tricks to play in this particular cabaret. So let's wait and see how things go out. I hope they don't mess with it too much. That was a pretty darn good race by all accounts. I would guess that there'll be some pressure from the Cadillac teams to give them a little more. Reasonably speaking, as I say, though, the LMP2 superiority was far more marked in terms of their ability to go longer, something like 3 laps per stint, than the best of the DPIs, rather than them being able to put in much quicker laps. At times they were faster, but at times it was the Acuras that actually had the pace to kind of play with. So if they are going to make changes, my view would be they need to be pretty small. I think they're pretty close now to where it needs to be. Mazda clearly struggling. Don't think you can judge very much in terms of pace on ESM's performance last weekend. They just had one of those weekends to forget. But I would suggest to you, I think the pressure, if it's going to come, is going to be coming from Cadillac.
So, Graham, where I mentioned earlier that we have our friends from Justice Brothers supporting the Marshall Pruett podcast, our week in sports cars, and everything that we will do this month of July. They have been part of really just the bedrock here of motor racing in North America with their additive lubricants and cleaners, just kind of forever, longer than I've been alive. And as I mentioned earlier, they're also involved in IMSA. You'll find them in IndyCar, just about every racing series, and what they would definitely look forward to is for those who are interested in developing something on the business side, your own business. If you want to learn more about selling and becoming a distributor of their automotive, semi-agricultural, and industrial products, check out justicebrothers.com. There are a couple other topics that stand out here. So we had heroic drives. Steven, if we're talking about prototype and the overall winner, heroic drive by Steven Simpson, pass of the year. I nicknamed it, because I couldn't think of anything better, as the whoosh, since the pass has been taken at Laguna Seca. I thought the Watkins Glen whoosh might be something good for Steven with his awesome pass of both a Cadillac and an Acura to capture the overall victory. There's also this kid, Colin Brown, who, for a long time, I've been wondering, why is he not a factory prototype driver? Heck, why isn't this kid an IndyCar driver? You name it. He's blessed with that much talent. Although Core did not win, boy, I would say that kid definitely reminded the world that if you are searching for truly elite talent, he has a full complement of that. But what did you think of his performances, especially alongside a Le Mans winner and general rock star like Romain Dumas?
Pace was searing, absolutely spellbinding, as it was indeed from Romain Dumas. Romain it was that made one of two mistakes in the 54 car, clipped a GT car, had a half spin, which meant that they had some time to make up. Colin did make an error. He did indeed hit the rear of the United car when the two were looking to get by the, I think it was a number 3 Corvette, which dislodged the rear diffuser, but no complaints about his pace. Pace was absolutely fantastic, spellbinding stuff. Picking up the reins after John Bennett did a very workmanlike job in his double stint at the start of the race. No mean feat, by the way, in that heat, particularly for any gentleman driver, no matter what, how well prepared. But Colin and Romain went about their task with some gusto. It was a pleasure to see, MP, some different names at the sharp end of this race. With Colin, with Romain, with young Phil Hansen.
Yeah, I was going to say, on the United Autosports side, wow. I mean, Paul di Resta, not a surprise, but to your point, great to see some new names. But yeah, I just thought that this is a breakout party for those who weren't aware that there are some really stellar talents in WEC P2 cars.
Yeah, there are, and it's great to see the likes of United Autosports coming out and doing the NAEC. I think they were gutted. It's got to be said after the race, but very much encouraged in the ability to actually compete. What might come about from that? Well, I had a chat at Le Mans with Zach Brown about what their intentions might be about IMSA and NAEC, all sorts of things, I think, in the melting pot. The surprise package for United Autosports, by the way, last week was the announcement of a 4-car Asian Le Mans program. Well, whether that will have an impact on whether or not they will do anything in the States, we'll have to wait and see. Clearly, it doesn't involve the Gibson engine car. It's the older spec P2 cars. But that's what they're offering to their customers in the closed season. But I think they'll be mightily encouraged by their experience over the weekend. Disappointed, but mightily encouraged. They came into Watkins Glen with exactly the right mindset. Low-key, in amongst all the patriotic liveries celebrating effectively Independence Day weekend. They had their own take on that with the 51 pictures of Britishness on the rear wing, and that went down very, very well with the fan base. I think they were a little worried as to how that might have been received, but they should have had no concerns about that. And by the way, cracking piece on their YouTube channel with the 3 drivers answering questions set by, amongst others, my good self and the excellent Charlotte Lumley from United Autosports, a question per 51. And I'm not going to spoil it by telling you who won, but it was mighty, mighty close. But great stuff. A race weekend, for the most part, fought with the correct spirit. And we haven't even mentioned GTLM yet.
No, and we're going to get there in just a second. So I believe at the beginning of the year, I say these things with confidence and with hope that they pan out the way I expect them to. And then we get to the midpoint of the season like this, and I realize that at least my good hope or good intentions might not have worked out. Tristan Vautier. I've seen that kid do some really, really special things in motor racing vehicles, whether it's open wheel or sports cars. If I'm just looking at 2018 in his leadership role, brand new leadership role in the Spirit of Daytona Cadillac program, a fairly dumb move at Sebring. Ended up destroying any hope the team might have had vying for a championship, and especially a meaningful championship position, if not a victory, at least something in the top three by effectively destroying a car, forcing SDR and team owner Troy Fliss and his entire program to miss the next 2 rounds, I believe. Then we have, a brief return here and at Belle Isle, and then again this weekend, and another fairly big, and unless I missed it, Graham, relatively unforced or unnecessary error that ruined their day ruined their day at the beginning of a 6-hour race and ruined the days of many others. I don't know if this is just really unfortunate timing with these 2 incidents so close together, or if as the paid pro, the leader, the veteran of the team, if in his first half season, I wonder if the team might be questioning whether they need to start evaluating someone else. I mean, it's not as if I want to see Tristan out of a job, obviously, but I would say if one was stating one's case for prolonged employment, he might be giving the team more reasons to question that than cementing his future. What do you think?
Well, you're absolutely right. He's got talent to burn, Tristan Vautier. Unfortunately, he's burning it, and that was not the smartest move at the start of that race. You're absolutely right, MP. It had a dramatic effect on a number of other participants, particularly both of the ASM cars, both of which suffered damage, and in the case of one of them, effectively ended the race there and then. But the whole thing from Sebring onwards, it's put them on the back foot, not really confirming what we're going to see from them, particularly Le Mans, maybe Road America, and it's a maybe. It's not gone the way they would have wanted with this DPi program that started with such, excellent speed at Daytona, but it looked to me like the team's heads were down after this one. It just seemed that at every turn things were just not going their way. Is Tristan Vautier exposed here? I think he might very well be. It makes it a rather easier decision to take if you feel you've got to. Let's wait and see what comes out from Troy Fliss and co. But it's fair to say that this has not panned out the way that they wished, or rather hoped that it might. Just about everything that could go wrong has gone wrong.
So before we close on Watkins Glen on the topic of GT Le Mans, let's touch on one final prototype aspect. And this is one where I'm truly happy for him and happy for the team, and that is John Church and also John Miller and Bob Stallings, all part of the JDC-Miller / GAINSCO effort. John Church has been the most vocal among the WEC P2 owners, heck, even since, I think, the morning of Sebring, of, hey, you told us if we bought these cars, we would have a fair chance, an equal chance of winning, and that has not been the case. And he has been absolutely resilient, steadfast in that with IMSA, in saying, look, I'm going to hold you to it. You said if we bought these cars, we could play for the overall win. And until we got to Watkins Glen, that did not look like a possibility. As you mentioned, the WEC P2s were never truly the fastest, cars of the lot. I mean, granted, they obviously were quick in qualifying, but if we're looking at race pace, Acuras in particular seem to be the ones setting the quickest outright laps. But even though the WEC P2s were not dominant in the way we've seen some DPIs be dominant at certain events, he has really held on, held firm, said, nope, holding you to it. I felt happy for him. Do you think that's still a fight worth continuing to pursue, Graham? Or do you think we're getting to a point where, the team has told me that they're looking to go to DPi next year, maybe even with the new manufacturer, because some of the inherent weaknesses with the WEC P2, even though they could pull off a win like they did last weekend, too much to ignore?
I think it's a battle worth discussing. because we've seen how good the racing can be when you've got those cars running closer. And as we've discussed before on the show, MP, what you stand to lose if you lose that battle is that you lose the international flavour of the really big events. Make no mistake, United Autosports, with the support of Andretti Motorsports, were firmly a big part of the show over the whole weekend at Watkins Glen. And, you can just imagine, can't you, if you got 2 or 3 of those teams, for the full NEC, and 2 to 6, or let's say, for Daytona and Sebring maybe, and a couple at Petit Le Mans, it just adds a bit of a flavour of something special. It's that something special. One of those things that are special about the Rolex 24 Hours at Daytona. I do think it's a battle worth fighting. They were woefully out of sorts compared to the DPIs at the start of the season. That's not the case now. It'll be interesting, won't it, to hear what kind of machinations are going to be coming forward in the lead up to CTMP in the remainder of the season. As I said before, my guess is that the Cadillac teams at least will say that too much has been done.
Speaking of what was done, Ford on pole, Ford victory in GT Le Mans. Was it that simple? Or did they have some actual heat on their behinds on the way to victory lane?
Well, they were running away with it at the start, without a shadow of a doubt, until an upshift problem for the DeWitt-Muller car put the car back. It was a topsy-turvy race, MP. I mean, yes, the Fords ran away with it at the start, then a upshift problem for DeWitt-Muller put that car back. Team managed to sort that one out pretty quickly in a routine stop. But the Corvettes had their literal day in the sun. The Porsches were very strong as well. Those two factory teams had a good old duke out with each other, and at times with the Fords as well. BMW, not so much out of it, really. Had never featured 24 car with issues really very early on. 25 car never in the hunt. And I'm sure there'll be further conversations to be had there about whether or not the balance of performance package that's been handed out to them is altogether appropriate.
Yeah, the BMW just completely out in a separate lower class of their own story. Feels like, I guess, other than the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which isn't sanctioned by IMSA, it seems like it's a conversation we have had, or a comment we have had to make too many times this year in GT Daytona. So, yeah, I don't want to make second use of BOP, so we won't do that. But, yeah, I will just say that I get that it's a brand new car, and so on and so forth, but we aren't forgetting the note that they handed out to a select few in the media towards the end of the Rolex 24 at Daytona, politely saying, we're going to have a big sit down with our friends at IMSA after this event and make sure that this kind of shellacking does not keep on happening. So, were there any other problems they were having last weekend to make both cars perform slower or less than expected? I can't say, but this at least is not. It's not a theme that we're touching on for the first time.
It's not. The answer, I think, there didn't appear to be underlying issues. Simply a lack of pace is the honest answer. But well, let's wait and see what kind of comes out the wash before the cars make their way up to CTMP for this coming weekend.
All right, 2 more items, I would say, Graham, before we jump into Q&A. We had a certain Timo Bernhard and the Porsche team, I think we could safely say completely obliterate Stefan Beloff's 35-year-old lap record set at the Nürburgring. And we also had a conversation with our friend Bob Stallings about the fact that he is looking to possibly put together a semi-privateer, kind of like Tequila Patron ESM with their contracted efforts with Nissan and Ligier to build bespoke bodywork, do something along those lines for a JDC-Miller Stallings GAINSCO Hyundai Daytona Prototype International effort starting next year. Which one of those do you want to kick off on first?
Well, I'd go with Hyundai. I think it's a great, excellent story from UMP. Well done with that. It's very easy, by the way, to get the LMP car to actually have a Hyundai styling feature. All you need to do is to put a wider door on one side. No problem.
There you go. Or I could say just pick a recent Mercedes sedan and use its styling as I'm sorry, they have a bit of a reputation of copying some of the higher dollar marks, but nonetheless, I like the spirit behind this. I know that going back to Bob Stallings Racing / GAINSCO's Grand Am program, for example, Graham, and even in the first year of the new era IMSA, they were proud folks, proud members of the General Motors family, whether it was with Pontiac branding or the Corvette Daytona prototype. I would say that there might be discussions there as to whether they could become part of the GM family. What you mentioned just a moment ago about some of the financial difficulties that Spirit of Daytona is having, could there be an opportunity for JDC and all of its ownership members to slot in as a full-time solution for GM and Cadillac next season with a DPi VR model or two? I'd say that might not be worth discounting. Knowing that they happen to field 2 Oreca 07s, which is also the same mark used by Acura for its DPi, that there is clear interest in whether they could become part of the Acura family and simply convert or upgrade their 07s to Acura configuration. I don't know, however, if the Acuras are available. I've heard a rumor, Graham, that Team Penske, I don't know how many years, but I've heard a rumor that Team Penske might have a multi-year exclusive with Acura. And if that is the case, then that might make JDC with their pair of Orecas, might make it difficult for them to upgrade to an Acura when Team Penske has a multi-year exclusive with their Oreca-based Acuras. So, would that effectively close the door next season to an Acura DPi? I think so. Is Mazda looking to put more of its models in other people's hands? Not that I know of. They're wanting to get to a place of winning and true competitiveness before that happens. I believe Tequila Patron ESM has a similar exclusivity clause with Nissan and Ligier with that bodywork. I don't know how many years, though, but I don't know if they're trying to sell those. So I would say, Graham, that if JDC-Miller and Stallings were to go with an existing DPi, I think Cadillac might be the only option. But the fact that Stallings, through his existing relationship with Hyundai, and the fact that he owns multiple dealerships and knows all the right people there, could be looking to do a ESM-style thing and commission engines and commission bodywork from Oreca that would be bespoke to, Hyundai styling. I like that approach of not having to put their fate in another DPi manufacturer's hands.
I love it, I have to say, and I do wonder whether or not this is the fifth manufacturer that sources close to Oreca have been whispering in my ear is imminent, potentially. I hope that's the case. I should say as well, it would be good to see written into a regulation a restriction on exclusivity. I can understand why that would be the interests of any particular team, but in exactly the same way as amongst the things that I know a lot of people have had a problem with the 2020 LMP1 regulations, one of the things that people have welcomed is this availability at a commercial rate of the factory hybrid systems that will come with the new breed of cars. I think it would be good to see something similar in regulatory terms around availability of those packages, whether or not it's 1 or 2 years. I would suggest to you that 2 is probably more realistic. I think that would be a good thing to enshrine within the IMSA sporting regulations. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, so again, I think with the exclusivity clauses in mind, with both Acura and Nissan, Mazda not really being in a position of willingness, if it isn't Cadillac, I would say the only other route for JDC, Miller, and our friend Mr. Bob Stallings would be to go their own route. And could that, Graham, become almost the new DPi standard of teams provided they have the financial means, teams saying, hey, well, if you're not going to provide one, then maybe it's upon us to go and find relationships to make that our own thing. And again, if that is the case, then full marks to Ed Brown and Scott Sharp for being the ones to kick off that possibility of the, again, call it semi-works, but really team-commissioned DPi effort. I am really, really wanting to get to Q&A here, so I'm not sure how much time we want to spend on the Porsche 919 Hybrid, Evo Fun at the Nürburgring. I did speak with Timo Bernhard yesterday, and then also spoke with Derek Bell. And so I think what we might do, instead of really delve into that here, Graham, between the two of them, I think we have about 25 plus minutes of audio for a podcast, and I'm writing a piece that roadandtrack.com asked for, I think, last week. So maybe we'll dive off of that, knowing that there will be a podcast and a written piece that folks can enjoy here shortly. Just so we can get to Q&A, because I love them, and you got a flight coming up here soon, and I don't want to shortchange our dear listeners who've sent in a lot of good stuff. And let's start with this. We have uncovered who this Dutch-Nigerian chocolatier happens to be, and we can finally name this person outright. Shea Adam. It wasn't Shaia Adam. It's Shea Adam. So
who's she?
Well, we're going to find out. Gearbox Girl is the Twitter handle. My apologies compared to Transmission Bloke. But nonetheless, Shea Adam, we have identified. We were off on nationality, and I'm not sure about chocolate love, though. But her question, you can cover every race that happens at one track for a full year, but not go to any other tracks. Which one do you pick, and why?
Brands Hatch.
And why?
Hello?
Yes, I got you.
It's close to home. It's close to home, and I can spend as much time as possible with the lovely Trudy. Simple as that. That's one of the downsides of doing what we do, MP, is that family time suffers. Brands Hatch is a fantastic place. It's the place my love for motorsport matured with my then very young son. And I still love the place. Brands Hatch, fabulous place to go and watch racing. Lots of variety available there. If I had to do one, it's a fantastic track. Two, it's actually very easy to both watch in various different places and cover it in media terms. Three, it's 20 minutes down the motorway.
Well, I would say if we're picking home races, I'm fairly fortunate because I have both Laguna Seca and Sears Point, also known as Sonoma Raceway, as options. So, I mean, if we're just doing the home thing, then I'm fairly blessed. Both feature great food, great everything. I would say if it had to be an away event, I would pick the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because A, it's huge, so I'd get lots of exercise, so that would be great. B, it has the oval and road course, and if they were to keep the short dirt oval inside turn 3, which they're putting up ahead of the NASCAR race, then you would, in theory, have 3 different major track layouts. I know with the road course, they have the MotoGP layout, the one that IndyCars use. They have more and more events there, I believe even the Red Bull Air races, so lots of great racing there, lots of interesting food, pork tenderloin sandwiches and other stuff, so I would say Indianapolis. Plus, it's Indy. I mean, come on. It's kind of the best thing. So, can't really get too far away from at least my little spiritual home for motor racing here in North America. Let's see. We kicked off, by the way, with first question on Twitter, which is something we rarely do. We'll stay here before moving over to some on Facebook. Alan Space says, what is your all-time favorite car number in sports car racing and why? And then he said excluding 00, because that's the number on our little cartoon for the Week in Sports Car podcast.
I can tell you immediately it's 69. Not for that reason, no, you filthy-minded individuals. It's because that was the number on the car that started it all for Daily Sports Car. It happened in 2002 at the British GT Media Day. I was chatting away to one of the teams when this astoundingly orange TVR was towed by the garage by a quad bike on its way to... It was just entirely vivid orange. We just launched Daily Sports Car, which was and remains vividly orange. They just lost a title sponsor, and I did a deal on the spot to have that car fully liveried by Daily Sports Car for the full 2002 season. I love it more than words can say. They did move on to have success with that car with other sponsorship aboard it. It was the Eclipse Motorsports TVR Tuscan R, later a T400R, and it's number 69 for that reason.
I would say mine's pretty easy. That would be 27, a number that I fell in love with when it was used by one of my earliest racing heroes, Gilles Villeneuve, and then became a number used to great success by another hero, Ayrton Senna, and yeah, 27 to me is just a pretty darn good thing. Let's see. Let's jump over to Facebook, and any suggestions on where you might want to start there, my friend?
Let's start with Andy Napier. Apparently, after an incident at the French border involving contraband barbecue Pringles and gummy Canadian bears, you have to be locked in a cell for a week with nothing but a single GT car prototype of your choice, GT or prototype car of your choice, in the room with you as visual entertainment. Which sports car could I look at 24/7 for 7 days, not get bored? McLaren F1 Longtail. That's it. Debate over.
Oh yeah, and again I apologize. Our cartoon hints at the livery worn by my choice. That would be the Jaguar XJR14. It's a visual feast. What, that came out in 91? Yeah, 27 years after it debuted. So, yeah, XJR14 all day, every day. And there are so many others, but you said one, Andy, so we're going to be good people. Let's see. Patrick Thomas. Marshall, you recently said the Tequila Patron North American Endurance Cup is an arbitrary championship in IMSA. With that being said, should the Endurance Cup be dropped and possibly make the 4 endurance races worth more points, multiplied by whatever length of the race? Example, Watkins Glen could be double, being 6 hours, Daytona could be 4 times, etc., towards WeatherTech Series, or just not make them points races, since like Le Mans, teams and drivers only go to win. Thank you. I mean, Patrick, that's my little bend on the thing. I don't care about it. The race within a race, I was a little bit interested in the formative Green Challenge, I think, when that debuted in the ALMS in 2008, just to see what it was. Hey, who could get to the finish line with the most efficient use of fuel and what? And it quickly became, for me, this kind of wonky thing where it was like, oh, okay, well, that's not really a thing in terms of, like, we're going to adjust how we perform. Or do something radically different in order to get this victory. The one thing, granted, maybe I should back that up a little bit, I do know that the Action Express team, they take great pleasure in trying to win the TPN AEC, and will try and stack their drivers in such a way so that each, whichever hour interval where you get, points awarded towards this championship, that they want to make sure that they have their strongest bullets in the gun to get as many points as possible during those hours that pay points towards the championship. But again, that's just my little angle, Patrick. I don't care about it, but there are teams that do. I assume that there are fans that do. So I wouldn't say to change it. And if Tequila Patron is paying money, or any other brand is paying money, either to the series or drivers or whomever, get some extra money for winning a championship within a championship, that's all good to me. I just don't particularly care about it while it's happening.
I'd say this much. If it's those 4 banner events with Daytona, Sebring, Watkins Glen, and Petit Le Mans, if that can draw a few guest entries in, I've always liked the potential for guest entries in a major international sports car race. For me, it's always been part of the draw that, you're not just got that stable core grid, you've actually got other cars that might turn up for the odd race here and there. It's always been a part of the magic for me. That, for me, is a key part of why that's a thing, and it's also a key part, as we discussed a little earlier, why this balance between the P2 cars and the DPIs is potentially quite important. It keeps that international flavour. I think it adds something. Certainly we could see that from a couple of cars that were coming in and having, if not one-offs, but we're having some of their periodic runs out at the longer races. That's what it's about for me. It's just a little bit more special. It's something the WEC lacks, is the honest answer. We don't have those banner events outside of Le Mans, and at times with the same race format for the rest of the calendar and with the same cars for the rest of the calendar, if you're covering the whole season, yes, stability is good in terms of the sustainability of a championship, but in terms of keeping your interest levels up, sometimes different's good.
Would you take the next couple of questions, my man?
Let's have a look from Kevin Pires Federico, which is clearly a witness protection program. One from Kevin there. Hey, Martin and Graham, why were manufacturers selling one-year-old and customer programs back then more frequently compared to today? Seems like a no-brainer if manufacturers are pouring money into R&D to trying to recoup some back through customers. I think the answer there is still do in GTLM and GTE terms. In LMP1 terms, of course, the money is just phenomenal. There are simply not teams and drivers out there that can afford the kind of outlay that you would need to run, for the sake of arguing, a year-old Toyota or a Porsche 919 or an Audi R18, even if the factories were open to actually showing that technology, which, by the way, they're not. So the reality is, on the LMP1 front, it has simply moved on. We've effectively dealt with the same question just a few minutes ago, MP, on the DPi front. GTLM, I don't think there's very much wrong there. I think those cars are making their way into customer hands quite readily. We had no fewer than 10 Porsche 911 RSRs at Le Mans this year, and 6 of those are in private hands, and there'll be more of them again for the coming season. Same with Ferraris, and there was no shortage of people, by the way, ready, willing and able to pony up for the new Vantage GTE, had that been approved for competition this year.
All right, where are we going next, my friend?
We're going to go for Jerry Sudduth, who says, do we think the interest in the record-breaking runs by Porsche would maybe encourage a loosening of their FIA regulations? One probably for you here at MP, the second part of it. What drivers have promised to move up from Porsche GT Cup into Conti or IMSA proper? On the loosening up of regulations, oddly enough, this was a regular conversation at Watkins Glen this past weekend, and the other run, by the way, that was referenced in that same conversation was Romain Dumas with the VW IDR electric car at Pikes Peak. These things have got appeal. When you've got manufacturers properly activating what they're doing in R&D, there's appeal there. And I think actually this is where there's a bit of a warning bell being sounded for the major race organisers, because I think what they need to consider is you've got to ensure that you keep this interesting for the manufacturers and their R&D teams, rather than allowing them just at any given opportunity to take whatever tech they can actually mount on whatever chassis they can put their hands on to go off and get a lot more in publicity terms for less in terms of the money spent. That's why they need to keep the entry point for factory racing as low as possible moving forward, because these are smart people.
I would say, Jerry, on the topic of record-breaking runs by Porsche and or otherwise, if an enterprising sanctioning body, if we think of Pikes Peak, for example, that's been a long-standing tradition where folks show up to watch nothing other than what some folks might call a time attack. You start here, you finish there. It's a competition by yourself, or a hill climb, something that is just truly the driver, hopefully in a pretty awesome vehicle, looking to set a new record and win the event in their class. There's a part of me that thinks, Graham, that maybe expanding this out to a wider mindset of, this Porsche thing's pretty amazing, but it's also happening in a bit of a vacuum. They go to track X, do their thing, and then tell us about it afterwards. It's not a big customer, a big fan thing, buy your tickets, be a customer to witness, this record-breaking land speed type approach to things. There's a part of me that thinks, an enterprising sanctioning body might come up with a set of Pikes Peak-ish type rules. It says, this is the unlimited class, make it out of whatever you want. Hey, VW, do something crazy. Hey, Peugeot, do something crazy. Audi, Toyota, name all the various brands that have built, whether it's prototype type things or silhouette cars that are just, again, totally ridiculous. I gotta admit, Graham, these are the things where I often think of those vehicles first, or among my first thoughts in terms of awesomeness. What if someone, an organizing body, said, hey, we're going to try and do this on a either domestic stage, international stage? I don't know. Porsche 919, and we'll just use the Porsche, but this could be other manufacturers. Porsche 919 or that VW. Part of this stage, or part of the calendar, is Pikes Peak, so that's one stop. Another one could be a Bonneville for outright straight line speed, or, Black Rock Desert. Could it be a visit to Indianapolis? Could name some of the big Supreme tracks, a Daytona. Pick some big events, big well-known tracks where just true one-lap record-breaking speed is the thing to watch. And yeah, I was really fortunate to be part of the unfortunately unsuccessful Spirit of America team in 1997 when we went up against the Thrust SSC, which did set the outright all-time land speed record, breaking the speed of sound. Just being able to be there as a participant, working for one of the teams, and seeing these attempts, oh my goodness, Graham, it's hard to put into proper words to describe how thrilling it was. I can only imagine what it would be like if you have great announcers, folks who can really present what they're seeing, good data so that you can tell folks as to whether they might be up or down on the lap record, etc. Calling out folks on these amazing runs, I think can sometimes be more exciting than an actual organized motor race. So there's part of me that says, boy, if someone were to come up with 3, 4, 5 tracks, one of them being a land speed style, one of them being a hill climb like Pikes Peak, a road course, then an oval, maybe a big oval, and going for outright records year after year, I think a lot of folks would be interested. I don't know how many, but I think a lot would. And I also wonder if some of the auto manufacturers who aren't engaged in traditional circuit racing, oval racing, whatever, might find that, like VW, as a place to invest serious dollars to showcase new technology and accomplish some pretty cool things.
I love it. I have to say, but you mentioned Thrust SSC. My then young lad, I can remember very well, either read or saw something to do with the Thrust SSC team being in a little bit of financial trouble, asking for a bit of a fundraising effort to raise money for fuel, would you believe, at that stage. And I can remember my little lad, who would have been around 10 years old at the time, asking me whether or not he could send his pocket money that week to Chernobyl, and he did. We sellotaped 2 shiny pound coins into an envelope, and off it went. And happily, James had the opportunity to meet with Andy Green and Richard Noble some years later, and they had that conversation. Inspiring stuff, isn't it? And it shouldn't be seen as a threat to traditional motorsport. It should be seen, I think, 1, as an opportunity, but 2, as a bit of a cue to think about some of the choices that they're making. It's no surprise to regular listeners here that it's becoming a bit of a kind of bugbear of mine that the over-regulation of the major series is beginning to have an impact on my enjoyment of part of the sport, and a lot of other people too. I love the idea, MP. I really, really do.
All we need is some really wealthy person who listens to our podcast to make bad financial decisions and make it happen. So I'm all for that. Well, let's do this. We're going to start to taper down. I don't want to say we're winding down the episode, but if we're in sixth gear, we might be going down to fifth, and fourth might be coming up soon, as we need to wrap up here before too long, knowing that Graham has a flight to catch. Let's see, where should we go next? Well, we touched on this a little bit earlier. Michael Wallace, hey guys, Colin Brown's a wheelman, no doubt about his talent. How come no factory team has picked him up, or is he content at Core Autosport? I think that's probably a big answer to the question, Michael. John Bennett and the Core team have been really good to Colin. They have not only employed him for a while now, but Colin Brown is just a truly vitally important piece of the Core Autosport family. So, Michael, I would say that while Colin has the talent to be picked up by Roger Penske, by a Mazda Team Yost, you name it, I would assume he is paid well at Core Autosport, and if a team were to come along and inquire about his availability, a DPi manufacturer, I don't think John Bennett would stand in his way, but keep in mind he's also driving for one of the revelations of the year in prototype. In Core, we can say, is clearly one of the best. So, yeah, like you, I'd love to see him in a factory team. He also has a pretty good gig in motor racing, Graham, as you well know. Good gigs are things that in this era you do not turn down, just because a factory comes calling. So, in a little bit of an interesting position where you don't turn down something great like what he has, because you might not necessarily find the same level of engagement or long-term commitment from a manufacturer if you did leave Core.
Wasn't Colin part of the Ford family for a while?
Yes, he was. So, and did a lot of great things. Was good in NASCAR. Also set the closed circuit record at Daytona with Michael Shank in their super turbo EcoBoost. So all kinds of good stuff from him there. Let's see. I'll take the next one as well, Graham, and then once you grab the next couple after that. Corey Showmaker says, we keep talking about LMP2 versus DPi. I know one of the major differences is suspension and springs. So why can't we open the damper regulations for IMSA? That would seem to be less costly and more effective than other measures. And then John Nottage adds to it. Says, great question, and I'll take it further. The anticipated cost of the new LMP1 regs are far above current DPi costs, and let's be honest, we're overdue for some form of economic recession. Why can't IMSA say to the ACO, thanks, but no thanks, and move on with the success they've developed in DPi? Well, a bit of a two-part thing, John. I do think IMSA will tell the FIA, WEC, and the ACO to do exactly that, pound sand with their new regulations, unless some sort of drastic cost-cutting takes place. And here's the other thing to keep in mind. We know that IMSA, the ACO, and the WEC took part in the discussions for these 2020 regulations. IMSA would not just accept those unless they had complete buy-in from their existing teams, and I guess any potential teams, before doing so. What I'm getting at is they wouldn't take a flyer that, hey, we as an organization think that whatever reduced annual budget number they've come back with, we think that's doable, we're going to green light it. They would absolutely need to get Acura, Cadillac, Mazda, Nissan to say, yes, we are in agreement too. In some cases, the teams that run those programs to say yes, because the last thing IMSA can afford to do is ditch their highly successful DPi formula. The teams that have made the DPi formula successful, Graham, say we're going to something different, and then have those teams come back and go, no, we're not. Or maybe you are, but we aren't. And we're either quitting the sport or going to a different class or otherwise. So I would say that IMSA's DPi success, John, unquestioned, and we think it's only going to get better. But one thing IMSA cannot do is make the mistake of believing that they are the driver behind which regulations are accepted going forward. And I say all that with the firm belief that Scott Atherton and Ed Bennett know it, that they would not try and force these regulations down anyone's throat, that they would indeed take full advisement from their paddock before saying yay or nay. And if the entrants say nope, that's above our price point, then they will indeed say nope. You keep your championship, we'll keep ours, and other than that, we'll look forward to seeing you each year when our GTLM cars head over. On the suspension stuff you mentioned, Corey, IMSA has been very consistent all along about adhering to the ACO FIA mandate of no modifications to the original WEC LMP2 specification. And even, whatever the updated Joker items that have come down this year, mostly on the aerodynamic front, they have adhered to the spec suspension angle as well. And so I agree, you would have much happier WEC LMP2 teams at IMSA if they could do whatever they wanted with suspension, like the DPi entrants can. But that was baked in with this new formula, and like the aerodynamics and doing any, call it BOP among the WEC P2s, IMSA has been totally hands off, and at least for sticking to something they said they would do, I have to give them full credit for doing that, even if it doesn't make all the entrants happy with those WEC P2 cars, Graham, because they can't go to super fun, tricky suspension items to ensure their handling is as good as all the DPIs.
It's going to be interesting, isn't it? And there might well be a watershed on the horizon, not just because of the LMP1 regulation changes, but also because you've got this transition coming with next homologation for LMP2. Now, in my wildest dreams at the moment, I have to tell you, I'm not absolutely convinced that Multimatic should be confident they're going to get one of those licenses. There are, at the moment, a sum total of no LMP2 spec Multimatic Riley Multimatic chassis out there in racing. And there's at least one, and possibly more than one, other chassis manufacturer that would like to come and play in the LMP2 arena. Equally well, it's got to be said as well, I think the Dallara LMP2 chassis is beginning to really struggle post the Joker changes. Hearing in the LMS paddock of a little bit of disquiet at this stage, nothing more than that, about the relative performance of the revised Dallara chassis against the Jokered Ligier, and of course the Oricas that were effectively the benchmark. A couple of customers really making it clear they're not very impressed with what they're getting in terms of performance out of that car. That's going to be interesting moving forward in terms of whatever happens in terms of balance, whatever happens in terms of revision of the licenses for LMP2 chassis, and in particular because that is the predominant numerical chassis for DPi. My view is that the real kicker here could be nothing whatsoever to do with LMP1 and hypercars or anything to do with that, but whatever decision is going to be made, or decisions are going to be made about the next round of licenses for LMP2 chassis.
Amen. Let's see. So we're going to pick from a final round of questions here, and thank you again for sending these in. We need to get our man Goodwin headed towards the gate here shortly. Let's see, what can I pick from here? Michael Wallace, I can answer this one somewhat quickly. I know we all hate these little letters, BOP. Do series look at each other when setting their BOP, and how different can the changes be between series? I would say, Michael, if the only areas that I know folks are really looking at is obviously if there's an alignment, meaning if IMSA is doing something to a model that is being used somewhere else in the world, that other series might take a look. We also have a little bit of the tail wagging the dog syndrome, where some base settings on BOP, whether it's GT3, GTLM/GTE, those can be driven from elsewhere in the world and then used here in America. Can't think of really any instances, Graham, where there's a BOP done here that is then carried over and or used in a championship somewhere else in the world. But yeah, I think the methods, Michael, whether it is removing or allowing more air into the combustion chamber, adding weight, taking away weight, adding or taking away fuel flow restrictions and such, aero, the methods for doing this. RPM is another one. Turbo boost. I mean, the methods for achieving balance of performance are, I don't think there are any real big differences like, oh, they do something over here no one's thought of, or these folks over here refuse to do the common things that most folks know work well. So, yeah, I don't know how much, in at least this day and age, series look across to one another for such things, but I'm sure back when BOP was gaining steam as a way of balancing cars, that there were folks looking across to go, oh, interesting, we'll have to think about that as a possible way of doing things. Next question comes from Steve Smith Jr. Good spending some time with you, Graham. How'd you like Watkins Glen? When will you be back in the States, and would you care to join us for the 24 Hours of Daytona? He says he hopes you have a safe trip back home. I wish the opposite. I hope it's horrible. And he said he's still waiting for that Porsche Hot Lap in-car video.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've been struggling with upload speeds. It was great to see Steve and his son David. I know they had one heck of a weekend, with many thanks to, amongst others, Continental Tire, and so both of them taking hot laps. But I'd love to do a lot more racing in the United States. My calendar is an extremely busy one. It was delightful to get to Watkins Glen for the very first time. I can tell you right now, it will not be the last. And one quick thing to say, by the way, to Stephen, to a number of other people actually stopped me in the paddock and on my way into the press room. Thanks for your thanks, and thanks for the support you're showing for this thing that MP and I are doing, and indeed for the other work that we do, whether or not it's broadcast work or whether or not that is the stuff you'll see on racer.com and dailysportscard.com. It means a lot, actually, when people come and say that you're appreciating the efforts that are going into these things, and pretty clear that a number of you are beginning to take a bit of notice of this little podcast. I'm thoroughly enjoying the fact that you're enjoying it. What can I say, really? I mean, my kind of take from the weekend was it was a happy race weekend. It's the IMSA format across the whole weekend is impressive. There's plenty going on track, whether or not it's one make racing with Porsches or with the Lamborghinis. The Continental Tire Sports Car Challenge, excellent 4-hour race on the Saturday, although I do wish that some of the guys in Conti would remember it's a 4-hour race and not try and win it at turn 2. It happens all too often, I'm afraid. It's a major comings together that ruined the race for a number of people. But I had a thoroughly brilliant race weekend. It's an old-fashioned sort of format, and lots to learn from lots of packages around the world to just draw together, a strong family of support races that, have a particular kind of look and feel to them, all very professionally done. A delight to be there. And a delight, particularly to get to catch up with a number of, that group that's always been pretty special. The US road racing fan is a wonderful beast, both singularly, of you all individually, and as a group. And I hope to see a lot more of you.
Amen. And I will double and triple that thank you to all those who've added the Weekend Sports Cars to your, hopefully weekly, maybe monthly, who knows what interval, but your podcast digestion. We won't go into it. We will keep this to ourselves, but I will say that Graham and I received rather unpleasant communications shortly after we started our own little sporty car podcast. And I don't want to say folks that were rooting against it, but some fairly surprising reaction instead of support, the exact opposite. And despite all that, we don't pretend that we are making a living off of doing this or getting rich anytime soon, but for whatever number of you that seem to enjoy it, we love doing it for you. And so despite whatever negativity or naysayers that have vocalized whatever ill-formed thoughts that they have had, we love doing this. So thank you for listening, and if you really want to help us out, tell someone else to listen, because more people is better than less people. Let's see. All right, Graham Goodwin, let's start picking out a couple closers here. Let
me go for one here. Jordan Hopwood. Do I think the 24 Hours of Spa will be a multi-class race again, like back in the FIGT days? I'm guessing by that you mean classes of car, not classes of driver, because it's obviously an all GT 3 event, although there is a small national class this year in these 68 cars that will race are released on the provisional entry list for the 2018 Spa 24 hours. I'm of the opinion that's a few too many. I don't think it needs 68. I think that causes more problems than it solves. Yes, I think it probably will. I think we are getting to the stage where GT3 budgets are getting... I'm actually frankly surprised they've sustained it this far, but the GT3 budgets are actually getting to the stage where they're difficult to justify beyond something that's got some factory support, and that's given SRO a few problems. GT4 is most definitely coming. It seems to be effectively GT3 as it was 7, 8, 9 years ago in terms of its pace. The cars are now more visually appealing. They've grown a few preponderances at the front, the rear and around. And yes, I think it will actually become a multi-class race in the foreseeable future.
And let me grab one from Sean, who sent this in. He said, with Porsche and their 919 taking down another record at the Nürburgring, what are the chances Porsche takes the 919 Tribute Tour to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to break Arie Luyendyk's lap record there? Sean, I asked this question of IMS President Doug Bowles in May, and he said, I haven't heard anything from Porsche. There's been no communication about this whatsoever. I would also say that while I can't think of that many tracks, Graham, where there would be a firm pushback and no, Indianapolis, I would say, would be one of them. Could a special car like the 919 with active aero and no limitations and whatever possibly knock down Arie Luyendyk's 4-lap average of 236 miles an hour and change in qualifying for the 1996 Indy 500? It's possible, but that's also kind of hallowed ground. And knowing that tradition at Indianapolis, which just held its 102nd Indianapolis 500, I cannot foresee any scenario, unless it was Porsche saying, we'd like to give you $1 billion to let us use the track, where they would invite someone in to break what continues to be the all-time record that is still a target for IndyCar whenever they go back each May for the 500. I cannot see them letting, what's effectively raiders come in to try and steal that record just for the sake because they wanted to.
I can tell you the answer actually, because it's covered very explicitly in the press release that announced Timo Bernhard's record time at the Nordschleife, which is that concludes their program of going for lap records at major circuits. So we are not going to see any more. Whether or not that means that they won't be going for runs at speed at Laguna Seca as part of Rennsport Reunion, whether or not that means they won't go for the hill record at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, I couldn't honestly say, but the car is going to appear at both those events, and with a number of the most recent drivers of the 919 Tribute and the 919 Hybrid at Laguna Seca for starters. But Porsche, in that press release, did say explicitly no more lap records being sought.
Yeah, and I think if we talk Laguna, I believe the current lap record is by a somewhat recent Ferrari Formula One car during a Corsa Clienti event. So even that, which again I believe is the true outright lap record there, was not something that was done in a big effort to break it, but it was done during an event. So if the 919 Evo were to lower that number, it would be quite a surprise, knowing what it has to go up against. But regardless, if they were, I think that would be a little bit different than, boy, we're going there and really going all out just to break that record. And I have heard that there could be multiple drivers in that car at Laguna, some current, some older. And I won't get into that too much more, but I'll be there, and B, I'm going to be nestled up next to that garage the entire time, because I want to be able to take photos of it uncovered for the first time ever, and but also to see some of the really cool drivers that are planned to go into that vehicle to turn some laps. Let's see, where else should we go here? Sean Robig, this is a perfect item here for the Marshall Pruett podcast. Who do I have to speak with at IMSA to express my appreciation and desire to maintain the variety and volume of sounds, coming from the cars on the grid. I was there this past weekend, and the grandstand rattling variety of noises were goosebump inducing. And I agree, completely agree, and have been steadfast in saying, Sean, that IMSA and the Pirelli World Challenge Series really give us just audio delight. And I don't know, I might have mentioned this, Graham, maybe not, I don't know, it's not like it matters, but at Mid-Ohio, I captured in-car audio with all 4 DPIs and one of the JDC WEC P2s. I think one or two of those sessions might have been wet, so we didn't get to hear a lot of the hard acceleration and so on. So I might recapture some at an upcoming IMSA event, but I've got a number of in-car IMSA audio features to roll out here. Also on the GTLM side, and I know that I have some ambient stuff to go. So yeah, Sean, as someone who is continually loving the sounds, it's great to hear that you and hopefully some others also get a little bit drunk listening to the WeatherTech Championship awesomeness floating through the air. Let's see.
I got one more, David Faulkner. If Resi Competizione is not going to continue after this season, will there be anyone likely to bring the Ferrari into season 2019 for GTLM? Surely the chance of winning an entry to Le Mans would entice a European team, or even a chance for a GTD team to step up, CJ Wilson, WeatherTech, etc. I thought I'd heard that Risi might do the odd one more race by the end of this season, but it will, I gather, be without Dave Beaky Sims. Bumped into Beaky the day after the Le Mans 24 Hours. He confirmed that is it. He will not be back with Risi Competizione. Done and out. I hope that's not the case. I hope Risi will return, but tend to agree there is a bit of a Ferrari-shaped gap in the quiver, isn't there, for GTLM in the United States. The 488 GTE is a fantastic piece of kit, and it maybe is a bit of a mark of, again, the escalating budgets GTLM and the nature of the factory-packed entry that you've got with those cars that makes a more privately funded effort all the more difficult to sustain. There are certainly teams looking at GTLM. Let's wait and see who decides to kind of break cover first and what it is they decide to break cover with. Remember, of course, that Aston Martin in active search for a partner for GTLM in IMSA racing next season.
Well, should we announce that the Goodwin Pruett Motorsports International United Autosports by Monteplast with Felix Sabate's team will be running that Aston Martin effort?
Yeah, and that's Mrs. Goodwin just divorcing me right now.
I thought I heard someone scream from across the pond. I should also mention, just because, my stupidity is something that I hope you all enjoy as much as I do, while we've been discussing here, had probably the third text from good man John Church over the last couple of years saying, "Hey, idiot, we're based in Savage, Minnesota. You wrote we're in Wisconsin." And then I saw him, whatever it was, a couple years ago, and he was like, "Hey, just so you know, the last thing you wrote about us, you had us in Wisconsin, and we're still in Minnesota." And spoke to him last week and interviewed him about him looking at, he and the team looking at DPIs. Made an absolute firm point, Graham Goodwin, of pulling up the website and confirming they were still in Savage, Minnesota. Got that right. Was so proud. Put up my little JDC-Miller Stallings Hyundai story today, and probably half an hour ago, got a text from John Church saying, hey, still in Savage, Minnesota, but you decided to write Wisconsin, and he didn't include the rest, but I'll just say, you stupid idiot, will you ever get it through that thick skull of yours? So I just replied to him.
There's two ways that this can go,
oh,
MP.
Man. Graham,
very simply,
I just thank you and others for
either you can actually get it right, or they can just give it up and go and move to Minnesota.
Yeah. See, John Church, it's your fault. You should know you should move to Savage, Wisconsin, so that way you can save me from my own idiocy. I just love the fact that, team owners and whomever drivers are just polite to reach out and text and say, Just so you know, idiot, once again, you've written the wrong thing. But you know the right thing, but you've written the wrong thing. So thanks again to John Church for humoring me. All right, Graham, let's take one or two more. I think Twitter is going to be the place because we've just about exhausted the book faces. Let me find one or two here.
Well, I'll tell you, while you're looking at that, I'm going to say a thank you to D Moll at DM31 on Twitter, who's dropped me a bit of a note here via Twitter to do with a notice that was sent to the Canadian Postal Service, a decent reason not to drop off the package at my door, and when it gives the opportunity for a reason why they couldn't deliver the package, it's crossed the box that says other with the comment "bear at the door."
Oh,
be careful up there this weekend. Anybody that's going to CTMP, remember. And just as a one minor balancing point I'd make, if it's tall, it's kind of got that dark, flowing, lush hair. That's probably not a bear. That might just be Ron Fellows.
Oh, very good point. And also a new IMSA bulletin mandating all cars affix bear whistles to the roof to try and scare off bears. Well-known use of bear whistles. The other option is lathering oneself up in mustard. They're keen on mayonnaise, but not mustard. So I believe those are the two options. So if you see some drivers looking decidedly yellow, you'll know which route they have gone for their bear avoidance mandatory implementation by IMSA. Let's see. We've actually been fairly light on BOP discussion this week, and so since we are rounding towards the finish line here, let's go to a question from @StarkRaving6. Discuss. Is IMSA at the forefront of sports car competition as far as getting BOP and tech regulations in good order? Also, will Land Motorsports receive any further sanctions from IMSA? I think the bigger question on the last one was, will Land Motorsports decide to further engage with IMSA to therefore receive any further sanctions? So, I don't know if they're in the mood to play. Oh, again, this is purely my own speculation, but they've had two instances where I believe they are questioning whether the hammer of justice has fallen on them in an unjust manner, but ultimately their decision to stay in or to not come back will be up to them. As for being at the forefront, I don't know, Graham, I might have to pass that one off to you on IMSA because I feel like I would become a broken record if I shared my opinion on that one. So what thinks you?
I think it's really tough, and I know we criticise and we analyse, but I think it's a really tough process. There have been moments when IMSA have not been a shining ray of light. There's been moments when they have. SRO have an excellent record with GT3, have been prone at times to have the fickle finger of, are you potentially going for a little bit of political there? Then we've got our friends at the ACO, and at times that too has produced some fantastic stuff in GTE, and for that matter, let's not forget with some fabulous times with the three factory teams with very different powertrains in LMP1 hybrid. So I think it's right now, let's not judge it on the basis of one race. Let's not forget we've had several months where there's been moaning and groaning amongst the LMP2s. It can be interesting to see what we get when we get to a regular IMSA race to see how that one pans out between the DPIs and the LMP2 cars, and equally can be interested to see what machinations we get, as you said earlier in the show, from BMW and GTLM. Whilst we could talk long and hard around how close together the Corvettes and the Porsches were, the reality was the Fords had something that they didn't, and the BMWs fundamentally didn't. So I'm not going to go down the road of saying these guys have got it right, these guys have got it wrong. This is a really tough thing to get right week in, week out across a whole season. And maybe what we need to do is just accept there will be some weekends when a team or a particular package has got something in the bank, and there'll be some weekends when they've just got to suck it up.
I would say that IMSA probably did its best job of the three classes in looking at the result across Prototype and GT Daytona last weekend, at least for what I've seen this year. And, again, I guess this is maybe an opinion thing more than a true numerically driven answer. But Yeah, the Fords looked like they were on a little bit of an island. So of 3 classes, it looks like IMSA got 1 wrong. So if we were grading, knowing that you had 3 answers on the test and you got 1 of the 3 wrong, that would be a 66%, which I believe might be a D, somewhere between a D and an F in the American grading system. But, prototype, as we know, the WEC P2s for the first time in a while had a real shot at something good and got it, so that was great. There was 1 or more DPIs that really did not have much of a chance, so maybe not great there, but okay. And then GTD, the fact that we had an Audi looking strong, there were some fortuitous things that put the Turner Motorsport BMW in a position to win, but after seeing Acura fall in a really strong position lately, and a little bit things being, I don't know if predictable is the right way to phrase it, Graham, but it looked like there had been some strong suggestions of either a Lexus or Acura direction. It was cool to see things end up a little bit differently at the finish line in GTD. So altogether, I guess if you get 2 out of 3 answers correct or mostly correct, that's not too much of a bad thing. But I don't know if I'm ever going to be at a place where I can honestly say, Mr. Goodwin, well, it's a tough thing and it's never going to be right, but they're doing their best. Ultimately, it's a decision they've made to use this style of trying to keep cars close. And if you are routinely getting 1 out of 3 classes wrong, or half of a class wrong, it's really hard to preach awesome, you're getting it right more often than not. But I don't know. I guess to invoke our first Juan Montoya-ism, it is what it is. All right. Well, why don't I pick the last question for us here? And this one maybe could be a little bit of fun. Maybe it could be a little bit strange. This one comes in from Jorge at Jorge S924. I don't know if that's a birth date or if you're a fan of Porsches that definitely need love along its long timeline. Jorge says, you're starting a new IMSA prototype team. What chassis and engine combination do you choose? You can mix and match all, including DPi and LMP2 WC engines and cars, maybe even GTLM and GTD examples as well. Why don't you at least start on the prototype front? And I don't know if you have GTLM and GTD thoughts as well. Any car, any chassis, any engine, what do you put together?
It's the Oreca chassis, because it's the best of the lot, without a shadow of a doubt.
Damn you took mine. Okay.
There you go. And I think I'd like to put the Cadillac engine in it, because it just sounds cool. So the Oreca with the, without a shadow of a doubt, with the Cadillac V8 in it, in GTLM, I think the prettiest of the cars is probably the new Aston Martin.
It's got great call.
Because it's got a turbo V8 and they're terrible sounding things, suck the very life out of the things. So I would be putting in either the old Aston Martin V8 or, better still, that screaming straight 6.
What about GTD?
GTD.
Or is GTLM/GTE too close to really divine there?
I think, let's have a think. Have to say, I do like the sound of the Lexus. That said, without a shadow of a doubt, amongst the GT3 cars, the best sounding of the lot is the Bentley. It's just sounds like a low-flying Spitfire. And I would put that in a body shape that possibly you wouldn't expect it to come from, because that's always fun, isn't it? And I have to say, I'm becoming a big fan of the look of the Acura NSX GT3.
Wow! Twin turbo V8 stuffed in the back of the Acura. Yeah, I don't even know how you would fit either that, or they
doesn't matter.
Hire drivers no taller than 3 feet who can just stand up in the cockpit to drive, because you'd have to
look like a Hot Wheels car. That's what you want.
On the prototype front, Graham, I think I would go with an existing option. The Oreca 07, as you mentioned, that has really distinguished itself. I think Acura's twin-turbo V6 has also really stood out as well. So I would actually kind of go with an existing combo, the ARX 05, but the twist I might put on it is from a looks. I think Mazda's RT24P is just the most beautiful among the 4 DPIs. So yes, this is a crazy thing to suggest, but I would take the body from one Japanese DPi, apply it to the other, and that would be my magic combo. Oreca with Mazda's bodywork and the Acura twin-turbo V6 in the back. On the GTLM front, and I'll skip GTD because you gave us a great answer there. I'll close here with, you can't take the engine out of the Corvette. I mean, the Corvette's not a Corvette without its engine. You can't take that. But what I do think would be fun is the Ford GT, which I do really like the looks of that, but I'm not a huge fan of the farty twin-turbo V6 sound. So the Ford GT with Porsche's best sound in the world, flat 6 in the back of it, I think that might be the most awesome GTLM looking and sounding vehicle ever.
Brilliant stuff. I know, just as an aside, by the way, before we wrap this, there is a little team that did try in the GT Cup, which is a second, third tier national GT championship in the UK, to run with a Honda S2000 with a Corvette V8 in it. Fabulous stuff. I bet that's exciting.
I love it. All right, well, Graham Goodwin, thank you to all of you who have listened to the Weekend Sports Cars on the Marshall Pruett podcast with Graham Goodwin, presented by Cooper Tires and supported this month of July by our longtime friends at the Justice Brothers. So if you can, check out their site, justicebrothers.com. And with all that said, also check out dailysportscar.com, where the good work of Mr. Goodwin, of Stephen Kilby, and the rest of the team can be seen. And racer.com, where some idiot named Pruett happens to write words and whatnot. So with all that said, enjoy your flight home, and boy, you don't get much time home before you turn around and go to another event, my friend.
No, off indeed. Tomorrow morning, due to arrive in London. Tomorrow evening, due to leave for the fabulous Le Mans Classic, and some fantastic cars, including at least one that we've mentioned before on the Weekend Sports Cars. Yes, sports car fans, the Chevy Cannibal will run at the Le Mans Classic this year.
And we're going to give a full detailed analysis of that next week. We also have IMSA at Mosport, also known as Canadian Tire Motorsports Park, Bear Attacks, Shea Adam, and Lord knows what else to discuss. Mr. Goodwin, thank you as always, my friend, and we will speak next week.